old, and it was created when we were a supervisory union. Now that we're a school district and we've lived through a pandemic, or according to well, it's not really out of a pandemic. Well, anyway, that's a totally different conversation. But it is this is guiding us into the future. And Greg is familiar with these questions. These are kind of the way that I go about thinking of what we need to do in order to support our students. And the idea is that if we make the right decisions over and over and over again, not just for the system, but also for each individual student, that eventually students will be in such a wonderful place that they really will be able to achieve whatever they need to achieve, and they will feel like they belong within our system. Knowing that, we also have financial barriers, we have time barriers, we have resource barriers that get in our way. So as the leaders of the district, it is our responsibility to take those into consideration and, work around them, so that way we can make the greatest number of decisions and the greatest possible decisions, kind of the ontological argument, if you will, so that way we can make sure that we serve students as best as we can. So this is even before I got here, our district created and passed an equity policy. They took the wording from the Vermont School Boards Association created a model policy of which our board adopted. And so this is where I really want to begin. It's really important to note that our school district, our principals, our teachers, our families, we were already thinking about and executing ways for students to belong and to feel included. And we were attempting to be equitable even without this policy. But then when we passed this policy, it gave us kind of the roadmap, or just kind of a framework to start thinking about serving our students differently. And so the things that we will discuss today are really just additions to the strong work that was already taking place. So that was our first step, and that was December 2020. That was before I came on the scene. So I guess it would be hard. So there's a lot of language in here, but I want to make sure that I point out a couple of things. It's really making sure that we're looking at data, so that way we can identify students not just as a whole and say, hey, we're a great district, but we need to be a great district for each and every student. We want to make sure that each and every student has access to the best possible education that we are able to provide within our system. We want to make sure that we're incorporating the culture and the voice, not just of our faculty and of the expected curriculum from the state, but also from the students who are within our bounds. Then we want to make sure that our teachers, our principals, our staff, our school board are aware that whenever they go into a situation, they're bringing their own identity and their own biases into that situation, and notice that sometimes that identity and those biases kind of predispose kind of an outcome that maybe are different than what we're anticipating. So we want to make sure that people are aware of that. And then finally, I'm really happy that at the very last bullet, it says, incorporate the principle of equity into the district's strategic plan. This is even before we had a strategic plan. So I'm glad that was there, but we did. And so I will get on to the next step. Okay, step 2. One of the things that I know that when I was talking with the board members initially, was we have to see where we are. We have to establish a baseline of what it is that we're doing well and what are the practices that we need to change. And so early on in my arrival, began sharing this idea with the board and with the administration to make sure that we were able to find an external agency who could come in, conduct interviews, look at our resources, look at our data, and tell us how it is that we're, how we are doing with regards to diversity, equity, and inclusion. And so it was important to not just listen to or see qualitative data. We actually needed to see how are our students who are historically in the margins doing in comparison to our students who are historically privileged. And so that is why we also wanted to take a quantitative baseline as well. So we have amazing educators and we have an amazing community, but we can always learn. And so as part of the expectations that we have and as part of the strategic plan, you'll see that we talk about being a learning community. It's not enough to just say we're the best, because we are, but it's enough for us to say we're the best and we continue to get better. We continue to learn from our practices and we continue to learn from other outstanding districts around the country. And then finally, we selected a company out of Boston called Mass Insight to help us do what we needed to do for this equity audit. Much of the work was done remotely. They conducted a lot of interviews of principals, central office people, board members, lots of students, parents, and eventually they came and they spent about 3 days with us as well. But more importantly, they actually looked at data that wasn't released from the state yet, and they were able to parse it into ways to give us the understandings that we needed. So they came up with 4 very broad recommendations, and there are, if you really want to find out kind of the stuff underneath it, this is available on our website at our DEI page, and it goes more in depth. It has a PowerPoint that was presented to the board, and it also has the 85 pages of recommendations as well, or information as well. So if you'd like to look into that. So I think number 1 is probably the most important thing that, and we've already, I'm not going to say we're finished, but we're about 95% of the way there with recommendation 1. The biggest piece was establishing a definition of what diversity, equity, and inclusion actually means in our district. Kind of like Little League Baseball, everybody has their own opinion on what diversity, equity, and inclusion is. And so if you end up having one person who says, well, it's this, and another person saying it's this, then you're never going to reach an agreement or consensus on what needs to be provided for students, for faculty, and for the community. So our DEI coaches and our DEI director, and you'll see information from them later on. They've been working incessantly, and I think it's actually on the next page, but I'll get to that. So, because I go more in depth on recommendation 1. Within recommendation 1, 2, they began to, they let us know that the responsibility for diversity, equity, and inclusion is beyond just the administration and beyond just the students. We really need to be working closer together. It also challenges us to look at our curriculum and our instruction methods, which gets us to number 2. So we have a lot of data, but it's kind of like going to an outdoor mall. It's kept in all the different stores, and they don't have doorways to connect. Here's your academic data, your grade book, here's your assessment, here's your behavior, here's your climate. All of them are in different areas, and they don't talk to one another. So one of the things that we've already done to meet that goal is that over the course of last year, we contracted with a data warehouse system that is going to enable us to have those pieces talk to one another, so that way our teachers, our principals, and I will have much easier access to that. Plus, I'm also working with the principals to, once we have that data warehouse, we're going to be able to extract data and then play with it in visualization software like Tableau, which I'm really excited about. But that also includes doing return on investment work as well with our budget. So if we're, and that'll be another conversation for another time, because that will take a long time. Number three, that when it talks about the internal district functions, it's really talking about our employees. So it asks us to look at what we are doing to increase the diversity, equity, and inclusion within our system. And it encourages us to think outside the box. It is being kind of tucked up here in Northwest Vermont. It is really difficult for us to find teachers, administrators, and other employees of color. And so we're going to have to figure out how to recruit employees of color, but then once we recruit them and they're excited about coming, where are we going to house them? And will we be able to pay them enough for them to live here? So that it challenged us to do that. And then recommendation 4 is something that I've been working on since I've got here, but I'm glad it was put down in writing. It's making sure that we are having situations like this where we come and talk, but then not only that, we have to listen. Right. So it's one thing for me to be up here talking for 20 minutes, but if I really want to find out what you guys are thinking as well, because I have lots of people who are very comfortable telling me what they think. But we have 1,200 employees, 4,000 students, so that's probably 10,000 people I really need in my ear so I can verify what these 20 people are saying. So okay, so I really wanted to share on the top right corner in the Notre Dame colors, and actually Rotary colors too, is that the Mass Insight found that it was really our students who were pushing us. And if you look at many of the things that we've adopted in the last few years, it's really it started with the students. So there is this grassroots, the students tell the teachers tell the administrators tell central office, and we tell the board, and boom, certain things begin happening. And I'm really glad that our students have that agency and that power to affect us. Now we just need to do that for other things as well. Right. So as I mentioned, coming up with that kind of definition of what diversity, equity, and inclusion is, the DEI coaches and the director came up. They interviewed principals, they interviewed teachers, they interviewed students. It wasn't just them who's responsible to come up with this vision. They made sure to get out there and listen to others, and they came up with this vision for us to create, sustain diverse, equitable, and inclusive learning ecosystems that meet individual needs, foster belonging, acknowledge histories, and cultivate and celebrate identities and stories. Don't you want your schools to be able to do that?
Community.
Right? Our community. So that, stick a pin in that. Because that's a different presentation, but I agree. So within this document that they created, they also created these diversity, equity, and inclusion goals that are going to be an appendix to our strategic plan that I'll talk about shortly. Because these things are already embedded within the strategic plan, but we want to make sure that we are following those guidelines as well. So that was step 2. Step 3, we began our strategic plan process in, I guess it was August 2022. And we felt that it was time for us to really align our goals and our efforts in the district to that of one district, as to be a rather than a district of schools, to be actually a school district. And so we wanted to make sure that if we said these are our values, our mission, and our vision, that there was a way to implement those things along the way. So we created, so you'll see this kind of cascade. So the values are going to be the biggest thing, and then underneath that is the vision, the mission. And you'll see the priorities, and we have the priorities and the objectives. All of that was approved by our board in March 2023. And we've been talking about it as an organization, from actions all the way to the goals. So it kind of goes like that.
What was Act 173?
So Act 173 is, I'm glad you asked. So at its very essence, Act 173 is about academic growth and belonging. What it does is that it charges school districts to make sure that students are receiving education from the educator who is most knowledgeable in the situation. It also changed the way that special education is funded. It went from being a reimbursable model to being a census model. And so, but we're taking, because it's, as we are not looking for funds, as we kind of transform what we're doing in the school district, there's going to be more responsibility placed in the hands of the tier 1 teacher, or the classroom teacher, to make sure that if something needs to be retaught, that it's retaught, and if it's not learned after that reteaching, then we can go to intervention rather than going to intervention right away. Okay. So we felt that we needed to make sure that we surveyed and listened to the community, so we could have kind of a guideline for the next 5 years. Because what we had been doing, or what the board had been doing, is creating new goals every year. So it was really difficult for the principals and the teachers to understand, oh, so that's no longer the focus of the district. So now everything that we do is going to be embedded within the strategic plan. And this is the piece why this part down here, I don't know if the light's working. Or maybe not. Yeah, there it was. You just can't see it on the. So by having these goals from the get-go over the next 5 years, we really can focus on equity. So as you can see, belonging shows up again. Connections is to we have. I'm sorry about that. So it has ways to reach out to our community, and also to make sure that we're doing right by the community. The third one is employee success, so that we couldn't figure out it. Didn't want to call it human resources. Didn't want to call it human capital. Didn't want to call it talent. So we wanted to make sure that we found a way to refer to it as, we want to make sure that we are recruiting, hiring, retaining, and developing our employees. And the final one is operations, because with so much of our budget also being outside of the classroom, like transportation and food service and facilities, we want to make sure that those are run efficiently, so that when we bring you a budget, and it is something that the taxpayers will say, yeah, that makes perfect sense. So, okay, step 4. So up until 2022, our DEI coaches were stipended teachers or counselors, or had other roles within the schools. So that meant really they had a full-time job, and then they did the DEI work. But their time was was being used probably, well, definitely more so than what they were being paid. So one of the first budget recommendations that I made to the board was that we needed to convert these positions to full-time. So you see Dr. Abu Naib in the top left-hand corner. At CVU, they have 2 people, but they're split 0.5, 0.5. Here at Williston, you have Ainika, who's in Columbia right now. At Shelburne is LaShawn Sells, and it's Charlotte and Heinsberg. They split Mike 5. And so they're essentially a resource for the school, for the teachers, for the families, and for the district. They cover a lot of ground to support what goes on in the classroom, what goes on in the cafeteria, what goes on in the hallways. And they really are kind of a way for us to make sure that we're not only implementing what we say, what we're implementing, but monitor it so that we get that feedback. And then if kind of one of the things that we created my first year were DEI town halls. And so they've been virtual person, and our first one is going to have a Latino and Indigenous focus. at CVU High School on November 10th from 6 to 8. So if you're available. Step 5. So on Tuesday, again, with this starting from our students, and then coming through our teachers, to our administrators, to our board, CVSD has created the most expansive transgender and gender non-binary policy in the state of Vermont, which means that it's probably up there in the United States as well. So while there was already a policy, a model policy from the state, and also some guidelines from the Vermont Principals Association for Athletics, we took it a step further, and rather than and made it a requirement for schools to be aware and provide opportunities for all students, not just students who are transgender and non-binary, but taking them into account as we're looking into facilities, as we're providing opportunities for participation in our many extracurricular activities as well. And then finally, we know that whenever it is that you're on a journey, or whenever there's change, or whenever there's growth, there's going to be a large number of stops. We are catching up with the state, and we are catching up with the country, and making sure that we are looking at each individual student when it comes to academics, and it comes to social emotional learning, and discipline and other components, making sure that we're taking all of that into consideration. We know, and I've mentioned this earlier, it's that we have to be aware of who we are whenever it is that we enter into a new situation. And those new situations could be lickety split. And it's not just you assessing a person and making a judgment, it's how you react along those ways. So how are we able to coach one another on taking your own identity and your own mindset into consideration whenever it is you meet somebody new or you're in a new situation. And then finally, like I said, it's really important to understand that we're on a journey. We can't just blow things up and start over. We can't just say, well, put it off till next year, because it really is our students deserve the best school district that we can provide, which means our community deserves the best school district we can provide as well. And that's our responsibility. That's it, with a minute to spare. So questions?
So I had to write this question down so I could get it.
Sure.
And this comes from my personal background and from my work at the food shelf. So DEI appears to be about how we relate to people different from us. In Vermont, that certainly includes people of color and people who are in the LGBTQ plus trans and non-binary groups. I'm also concerned about children from abusive and inherently unresourced, marginalized, and homeless families. Are they considered in DEI work?
They are considered in DEI work because I don't know if you mentioned students who are on like individualized education plans, like students who are on 504 special education plans. Each student needs to be considered. My background, or the last principal position that I had before I became a central office employee, was at what's called Chavez High School in Houston, and it was and it was 3,300 kids, 99% students of color, 95% free and reduced lunch, in the shadow of 5 multinational petrochemical companies. So environmental racism left and right. And so you had to look at every student individually. And so we had students who were doing math at the highest international level in the world in that building, but we also had students who had, ridden on top of trains from across Mexico because they were coming from Honduras and Salvador. So we, and they could have been the same person, right? So you have to take that into consideration. It's every student.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Yes.
In listening to you, I wished I could take you to Washington, DC.
Let's go.
Or possibly the Middle East with what's going on. And I was thinking about it over the weekend and how would I deal with it if I had little children still? And keeping in mind what COVID did to education, the kids were, weren't together anymore. And yet even on the TV and the radio now, you hear about such hatred that's going on. And I was thinking, well, how would I feel if I were hated by all my neighbors? I really love my house. I really don't see myself as a bad person, but they all hate me. And how can I deal with that? And I was thinking how hard it must be in education, because you're kind of hitting the wall trying to get through. I mean, what you're doing, I think is absolutely wonderful, but we need to really expand it. Do you see that you're kind of hitting the wall when you're looking nationally too, or you think most education is trying to overcome the current event?
So thank you for that question. Yes, we'll go to the Middle East. What I would say is that within education, we've been tasked to do so many things. We're not just, providing academics anymore. We were doing COVID testing. We are making sure that students are fed breakfast and lunch, and I'd like dinner, but and I'd like to feed them over summer. So maybe you guys can help me with that too. There are principals, superintendents, teachers. There's an incredible amount of things that have been placed on the backs of schools. And if the new Title IX regulations get passed, we're going to be even busier, or when they are passed, we're going to be even busier. So that's number one. Number two, we have to recognize that it's not just the school's responsibility. We need the towns, we need nonprofits, we need companies to say, what are we going to do to not just help our students, but help our community? And so, because if it's left just to us, we hardly have the time to do it. And so that would be my plea is and I know that Pastor Paul, with his responding to racism, of which thank you so much for allowing me to present there a few times. It's a way for us to have this conversation. And then I know you're having this DEI month. So the more that you talk about it, the more that you see it in the community is really important. The one last little pitch that I would also like to make, and then I will take your question. Please recognize that, and I'm sure it doesn't affect any of you. Sometimes we encounter, and Greg will tell you this too, is that DEI, equity, inclusion should apply to everybody in some fashion. We frequently encounter families who come to us and say, well, it shouldn't apply to me. Or in this situation, I need equity too, despite the fact that they come from a privileged background.
Right.
And so that is what I was mentioning earlier about your identity and your biases. If we can at least have people check their mindset about it, then we can have better conversations about it. So, yes, ma'am.
And I think I was kind of just going off a comment more than anything, kind of going off what you said and what you just said, is that our community in general, so we tend to put everything on our teachers, take care of the kids 100% when they're not at home. And just like with our police department, we expect them to be social workers and to do more than what we initially intend for them to do, without community just getting more involved and being community, because the it takes a village thing, right? So it's just kind of, I love the fact that this whole concept of diversity that is growing. It's just like it's becoming easier to talk about mental health. It's becoming easier to talk about diversity and inclusion. And I think until it really gets, the ball gets rolling and it's just on the tips of everybody's tongue and they're acting on it, that, you know, eventually I feel like we're gaining momentum. It's got to be more than just in this little group, you know, it's going to be the whole community. It has to be everybody.
I definitely echo that. And I think, I guess my question for you is how can we be involved? Because if you look at us, we don't look that diverse. We all know that we are, and there's a lot more than just the way we appear. But we're really interested in bringing in more members of our community who haven't historically been here. We also have our town manager here. Yeah, thank you for being here. What can we do to help? Because we are the community, we are part of the community. What can we do to help the schools?
So, thank you again for that. So I would make sure that Greg has stuff that both Allenbrook and Williston post on the marquee. And when it's a large event, make sure that you are able to participate. But it wouldn't just be, I guess the other piece is the collective knowledge of the town is more than even just the collective knowledge of the school district. And so when there are ideas, we need to be made aware of them, because sometimes we can actually bring them to fruition. And especially if there are others who are willing to pitch in. It's just, it comes back to this idea that if the school district is responsible for the ideas and the implementation and the monitoring alone, that's a challenge. I have also several times worked with Krista Lee from the Williston Justice Center. And so I know that is she in charge of the town DEI committee?
There's a group that works through the CJC that have done a lot of conversation.
Right. So that would be something where it would be good for the school district, like if the school district doesn't have a representative on that, it would be good for us to be there so we can bridge what the town is doing along with what the school district is doing to have, you know, double the impact, if not more.
She was scheduled to be here as well to talk to us, but unfortunately couldn't make it. But thank you.
Oh, no worries. Yes, ma'am.
Thanks so much for this. And clearly you're not talking about just doing something in school, it's about a culture that everybody sort of touched on this. And sometimes we give a name to something and now it's DEI, and that's it, you know, 4 years ago, most of us wouldn't have known what that meant. But I think just using that term even, and I'm not suggesting that you change it, but we mainly only think about ethnicity and in that, and it's so much, I can think of a few students that must be in your schools. The economic differences between students is vast, and that has to be part of it. The young woman who I was on the Lund board for many decades. The young woman's going through a pregnancy, and that's a different situation. The kids that are in split families where they're 1 week they're in one place and 1 week in another place. So it's really an individualization of students within our communities, and not just and maybe this is just me, when I hear DEI, I sort of think of a subset of people that it's way broader than that. I think if we really want to reach the students at where they are.
So there are states where if I was giving a presentation to Rotary, I couldn't say DEI. My colleagues in Florida, in fact, I gave a presentation there, I don't know, at a Universal Design for Learning conference, and I had to change the title of my, because it was the systems thinking for the anti-racist leader. I had to change the name of my presentation. And so to respond to your question, that's why we predominantly use growth and belonging, because that affects everybody. And when you're in one of those other states, you say access and opportunity.
Mhm.
And so, because that's what it's about, and that's, my wife has been a special educator for a really long time, so we've had lots of conversations about that, so everything that's in my head, when I refer to DEI, is not just about race and ethnicity, it's about making sure that every student is included. Greg, you had your hand raised.
Well, I just wanna share a really timely example. Yesterday afternoon, our teachers were engaged, our kindergarten through fourth grade teachers were engaged in professional learning. Presented by one of our DEI coaches, Christina Deely yesterday, and we were talking about, the theme was harmful language. And harmful language and examples that we were talking about were examples that unfortunately we see and hear every day. Things like, ew, you have two moms, that's gross. And like what that, things like that, or uses of the word, trailer trash. Or comments about somebody who lives in a trailer, or so we are taking that lens of understanding and celebrating and being responsive to diversity and as broad a band as we possibly can. It was a really, really powerful conversation.
Great.
Thank you, Greg, and thank you, Renee. This was fun. One more thing for you to do. before you
excellent.
leave. You have to pick a raffle ticket and read the last three numbers.
Should have bought a raffle ticket. Last three numbers, 265.
Oh, Andy, nice. Thank you very much. I might also mention to you that, I'll give you a minute,
Okay.
that, at the food shelf, we're seeing more homeless families, not just homeless individuals.
And
Thank you.
Renee, thank you, Charlie, for reminding me, as a thank you for you being here and sharing with us today. We will be making a donation in your name to the Williston Central School Mentoring Program.
Excellent.
Thank you. And we have a whole cultural thing to deal with. Just, there's so much work, but.
And if there's any way I can be a part of it, you let me know.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
We appreciate it.
And now our sergeant at arms.